The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on her. Emma sat in the witness stand, hands trembling, facing the man who destroyed her, her own uncle. He sat there in his suit, looking respectable, looking innocent. But Emma knew the truth, and today the world would know it too. This is part 2 of Emma's story, the part where silence becomes a roar, the part where a small town is forced to choose between protecting a predator and believing a survivor. If you missed part 1, don't worry, we'll catch you up. But I'm warning you now, what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. If you've ever wondered whether speaking up actually leads to justice, if you've ever questioned whether the system protects survivors or predators, if you've ever needed proof that one voice can change everything, this story will answer all of those questions. Because Emma didn't just survive, she fought back. And what happened in that courtroom will restore your faith in courage. For those of you just joining us, let me bring you up to speed quickly, because you need to understand how we got here. Emma was 23 years old, working 2 jobs, saving every penny to open her own cafe. She lived with her mother, Patricia, in a small town called Riverside, population 5,000. Emma's father had left when she was 4, so she grew up without that presence in her life. But she had her Uncle David. David was Patricia's older brother, 12 years her senior, and from the time Emma was a little girl, he was there. Every birthday, every school event, every milestone. He was the father figure she never had, or so everyone thought. The truth. David wasn't being a good uncle. He was grooming Emma. For years, he built trust, created dependency, positioned himself as the most important man in her life. And then, on Emma's 23rd birthday, during what should have been a celebration, he made his move. The party was winding down. Emma's mother, exhausted from hosting all day, went upstairs to bed. It was just Emma and David left, cleaning up, talking, laughing. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. David started making comments that made Emma uncomfortable. He stood too close. He touched her in ways that crossed boundaries. And when Emma asked him to stop, when she asked him to leave, he didn't. What happened next in that kitchen, after everyone had gone to bed, after the candles had been blown out, changed Emma's life forever. Somewhere between the laughter and the last slice of cake, a line was crossed, a line that should never, ever be crossed. David assaulted his own niece, the girl he'd watched grow up, the girl who trusted him more than anyone. And then, as if nothing had happened, he straightened his shirt, told Emma he'd see her next week for dinner, and walked out the door. Emma stood there, frozen, shaking, unable to process what had just happened. She spent the entire night on the bathroom floor, replaying everything, blaming herself, wondering if she could have done something different. When her mother found her the next morning, Patricia knew immediately that something terrible had happened. And when Emma finally found the words to tell her, Patricia made a choice. She believed her daughter, and she called the police. That's where part 1 ended, with a phone call that would tear a family apart, but also set the wheels of justice in motion. Now, in part 2, you're going to see what happens when a survivor refuses to stay silent, when a mother refuses to protect a predator, and when a small town is forced to face the truth about one of their own. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, or if you missed part 1, make sure you go back and watch it, then come back for this conclusion. And please, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our stories. When Detective Sarah Morrison and Detective Frank Hayes arrived at Emma's house that morning, they didn't come in with skepticism. They came in with compassion. Detective Morrison had worked sex crimes for 8 years. She'd seen cases like this before, too many times. She knew the patterns, knew the responses, knew what real trauma looked like, and when she sat across from Emma in that living room and listened to her story, she believed her. Emma told them everything. The party, the comments, the way David wouldn't leave, the way he touched her, the way she froze. She told them about the years of grooming, the excessive attention, The late-night texts, the way he always positioned himself as her protector. Detective Hayes took notes, his expression neutral but his jaw tight. When Emma finished, Detective Morrison reached across and gently touched her hand. "You are so brave," she said, "and we're going to do everything we can to hold him accountable." The detectives explained the process. They'd open an official investigation, interview witnesses, collect evidence, and depending on what they found, they might arrest David. They told Emma it wouldn't be easy, that she'd have to relive this multiple times, that people might not believe her. But they also told her something else. She wasn't alone. After the detectives left, Patricia made phone calls. She called her sister Linda and told her what happened. Linda's first reaction was disbelief. "David? Are you sure? Maybe Emma misunderstood something." Patricia's voice went cold. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. My daughter was assaulted, and I believe her." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Linda said quietly, "I'm sorry. You're right. I believe her too." But not everyone did. Within days, the whole town knew. In a place like Riverside, secrets don't stay secret, and the reactions were divided. Some people believed Emma immediately. They'd always thought David was a little too friendly, a little too involved. Looking back, the signs were there. But others rallied around David. "He's such a good man," they said. "He's been a pillar of this community for decades. This girl must be confused, or looking for attention, or trying to get money." Emma couldn't leave the house without feeling eyes on her, whispers following her everywhere. One day at the grocery store, an older woman she'd known her whole life looked her up and down and said, "Shame on you for destroying that man's life." Emma never went back to that store. Meanwhile, Detectives Morrison and Hayes were building their case. They started by interviewing people at the plant where both David and Emma had worked. Most of David's co-workers defended him. "David's a great guy, always professional. I don't believe he'd do this." But then they spoke to a woman named Rachel. Rachel was younger, mid-20s, and she'd worked under David for 3 years. When Detective Morrison asked if she'd ever felt uncomfortable around David, Rachel hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. "He never did anything overt," she said carefully. "But he'd stand too close. He'd comment on my appearance in ways that made my skin crawl. Once he touched my lower back when we were alone in the supply room, and I froze. I never reported it because I needed the job, and David was friends with the managers. But yeah, he made me uncomfortable." Detective Morrison leaned forward. "Would you be willing to testify to that if this goes to trial?" Rachel looked scared, but then she took a deep breath and said, "Yes. If it helps Emma, yes." Rachel's testimony was crucial. It established a pattern. It showed that Emma wasn't an isolated incident, that David had a history of crossing boundaries with younger women. The detectives also pulled David's phone records. They found dozens of text messages to Emma in the months leading up to the assault. On the surface, they seemed innocent. "Just checking in, how are you? Saw this and thought of you. You looked beautiful at church today." But when viewed together, with context, they painted a picture of grooming, excessive contact, boundary violations, inappropriate attention. The detectives interviewed Emma's mother, asking about David's behavior over the years. Patricia, with tears streaming down her face, recounted moments she'd dismissed at the time. The way David insisted on tucking Emma in when she was little, even when Patricia said she'd do it. The way he'd comment on Emma's appearance as she got older, calling her his special girl. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now, it felt like evidence. 3 months after Emma made her report, Detectives Morrison and Hayes felt they had enough. They went to the district attorney, Michelle Torres, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor who'd been handling sex crimes cases for 15 years. Torres reviewed the evidence, the witness statements, the text messages, the timeline, and then she looked up at the detectives and said, "Let's bring him in." On a cold Tuesday morning in November, Detectives Morrison and Hayes showed up at David Mitchell's house with a warrant for his arrest. David answered the door in his pajamas, coffee in hand, looking annoyed. "What's this about?" he asked, as if he didn't already know. Detective Hayes stepped forward. "David Mitchell, you're under arrest for sexual assault." David's face went pale. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything." "You'll have your chance to tell your side," Detective Morrison said. "But right now, you need to come with us." As they put him in handcuffs and led him to the police car, neighbors came out of their houses, watching. Some looked shocked, some looked satisfied, and some looked angry. At the police, at Emma, at anyone who dared to believe this could be true. David posted bail within 24 hours. He hired Gregory Fuller, a defense attorney known for his aggressive tactics and high win rate. Fuller was expensive, but David's friends in the community pooled money together to help him. "We can't let a good man go down over false accusations," they said. Fuller's strategy was predictable but effective: discredit the victim. He started digging into Emma's past, looking for anything he could use. He found out she'd dated a few guys in her early 20s. He'd tried to paint her as promiscuous. He discovered she'd seen a counselor in high school for anxiety. He'd suggest she was mentally unstable, unreliable. He'd question why she didn't scream, why she didn't fight harder, why she showered afterward, why she didn't immediately tell her mother. Every classic victim-blaming tactic in the book. But Michelle Torres, the prosecutor, wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. She'd seen these tactics before, and she was ready. Torres met with Emma multiple times to prepare her for trial. "He's going to try to make you feel like you did something wrong," Torres warned. "He's going to twist your words, question your memory, make the jury doubt you. But here's what you need to remember. You tell the truth. You stay calm. You look that jury in the eye, and you tell them exactly what happened. And I'll handle the rest." Emma was terrified. The thought of sitting in a courtroom, facing David, being cross-examined by his lawyer. It was almost too much. But every time she thought about backing down, she thought about Rachel. About the other women David might hurt if he walked free. About every survivor who stayed silent because they saw how hard it was for the ones who spoke up. She couldn't give up. Not now. The trial date was set for April 15th, exactly 6 months after the assault. 6 months of waiting, of anxiety, of watching David walk around town like nothing happened. 6 months of people whispering, of families choosing sides, of friendships ending over who they believed. Patricia lost half her family during those months. Her brother George refused to believe David was guilty. "You're destroying this family over lies," he told Patricia. She stopped speaking to him. Her sister Linda stood by her, as did a few cousins. But the family gatherings, the Sunday dinners, the holiday traditions, all of it was gone. David, meanwhile, played the victim perfectly. He showed up at church every Sunday, shook hands, smiled, acted like a man wrongly accused. His supporters would hug him, tell him they were praying for him, assure him the truth would come out. And it made Emma sick. The night before the trial, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, running through everything in her mind. Her mother came in and sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm so proud of you," Patricia said softly. "You're the strongest person I know." Emma didn't feel strong. She felt exhausted, terrified. But she nodded anyway because she knew her mother needed to believe it. "Tomorrow we fight," Patricia said, "and no matter what happens, we fight together." Emma took a deep breath. "Okay, together." The courthouse was packed the morning of April 15th. Reporters lined the steps outside. Curious townspeople filled the gallery. On one side of the courtroom sat Emma's supporters, her mother, her Aunt Linda, a few close friends, and Rachel, who'd flown in to testify. On the other side sat David's supporters, his friends from work, people from church, faces Emma had known her whole life, now glaring at her with disgust. Emma walked in with her mother by her side, head down, hands shaking. She could feel every eye on her, could hear the whispers. Michelle Torres met them inside and guided them to their seats. "You've got this," she whispered to Emma. "Just breathe." David sat at the defense table with Gregory Fuller, dressed in a crisp suit, looking calm, composed, innocent. He didn't look at Emma once. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s named Judge Carolyn Bennett, known for being fair but tough. "All rise," the bailiff said, and the room stood. Judge Bennett sat, looked over the courtroom and said, "Let's begin." The prosecution went first. Michelle Torres stood and addressed the jury, 12 people from surrounding counties, 6 men, 6 women, all ages, all backgrounds. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Torres began, her voice strong and clear, "this case is about trust, about family, and about what happens when that trust is betrayed in the most horrific way imaginable." She laid out the timeline. Emma's childhood, David's role as a father figure, the years of grooming, the night of the assault, Emma's courage in coming forward. "The defense is going to try to make you doubt Emma," Torres said. "They're going to ask why she didn't scream, why she didn't fight, why she didn't immediately report. And I'm going to answer those questions for you right now. Because when someone you love, someone you trust more than anyone in the world, violates you, your brain doesn't respond with logic. It responds with survival. And for Emma, survival meant freezing. It meant shutting down. It meant trying to process the impossible." Torres walked closer to the jury. "David Mitchell is a predator. He spent years building Emma's trust so that when he finally made his move, she'd be too confused, too scared, too conditioned to fight back. And after he assaulted her, he walked out that door like nothing happened. Because he thought he'd get away with it. He thought Emma would stay silent, like so many victims do. But she didn't. She spoke up. And now it's your job to hold him accountable." Then it was Gregory Fuller's turn. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and smiled at the jury like they were old friends. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice warm, folksy, "my client, David Mitchell, is a good man, a hard-working man. A man who spent his entire life helping his family, his community, his church. He's been a father figure to his niece Emma since she was 4 years old. He loved her like his own daughter." Fuller paced in front of the jury. "Now, the prosecution wants you to believe that on one night, out of nowhere, this good man suddenly became a monster. But does that make sense? Or is it possible, just possible, that there's been a misunderstanding here?" He planted the seed of doubt masterfully. "Emma is a young woman who's been through a lot. She grew up without a father. She's struggled financially. She's seen counselors for anxiety. Is it possible that in a moment of confusion, of emotional distress, she misinterpreted something? That what she perceived as assault was actually something else?" Torres shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying, not presenting evidence." "Sustained," Judge Bennett said. "Mr. Fuller, save it for your witnesses." Fuller smiled. "Of course, Your Honor." But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. The suggestion that Emma was confused, unstable, unreliable. The first witness was Emma herself. Torres called her to the stand, and Emma walked up on shaking legs. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The courtroom was silent. Torres approached gently. "Emma, can you tell the jury what happened on the night of your 23rd birthday?" Emma took a deep breath. And then, for the next hour, she told her story. She described the party, the way it felt safe and happy. She described her mother going to bed, leaving her alone with David. She described the shift in his tone, the comments, the touches. "I asked him to stop," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I asked him to leave, but he didn't. He kept going. And I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just froze. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept talking. She described the assault in as much detail as she could bear. She described the aftermath, the shame, the confusion, the morning when she told her mother. "Why didn't you scream for your mother?" Torres asked gently. "She was right upstairs." Emma wiped her eyes. "I don't know. I wanted to, but my voice wouldn't work. My body wouldn't move. I was so scared and so confused, and I couldn't." "And why did you shower afterward?" "Because I felt dirty," Emma whispered. "I just wanted to feel clean again. I didn't know I was destroying evidence. I needed to wash it away." Then it was Fuller's turn to cross-examine. He stood, and the energy in the room shifted. "Miss Thompson," he began, his tone polite but pointed. "You say you were too scared to scream, but your mother was just upstairs, correct?" "Yes." "And you and your mother have a close relationship, correct?" "Yes." "So, if you were truly being assaulted, truly in danger, wouldn't your instinct be to call out for the one person you knew could help you?" Emma's hands gripped the armrests. "I couldn't. I was frozen." Fuller raised an eyebrow. "You were frozen. Interesting. But you weren't physically restrained, were you?" "No, but..." "So you could have moved if you wanted to?" Torres stood. "Objection. Argumentative and mischaracterizing trauma response." "Sustained," Judge Bennett said. Fuller smiled. "I'll rephrase. Miss Thompson, you've stated that after the alleged assault, you showered. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you're aware that showering destroys physical evidence, correct?" Emma's voice was small. "I know that now." "But you didn't think of that in the moment?" "No. I just wanted to feel clean." Fuller nodded slowly, as if he didn't quite believe her. "And you've seen a counselor for anxiety in the past, correct?" Torres objected again. "Relevance, Your Honor." "I'm establishing the witness's mental state," Fuller said smoothly. Judge Bennett sighed. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Fuller." Fuller turned back to Emma. "So you've struggled with anxiety, with emotional regulation?" Emma's voice hardened. "I saw a counselor in high school because my father abandoned me. That doesn't make me a liar." Fuller held up his hands. "I never said you were lying, Miss Thompson. I'm simply trying to understand." But the implication was clear, and Emma could see some of the jurors shifting in their seats, doubt creeping in. After Emma's testimony, Michelle Torres called Patricia to the stand. Patricia described finding Emma that morning, the way she looked broken, the way she told her what happened. "Did you believe your daughter?" Torres asked. "Without a doubt," Patricia said firmly. "I know my daughter, and I know when she's telling the truth." Torres then called Rachel, the co-worker from the plant. Rachel testified about David's inappropriate behavior toward her, the comments, the touches, the way he made her feel unsafe. "Did you ever report it?" Torres asked. "No," Rachel admitted. "I was scared. He was my boss's friend. I needed the job." "But you're here now, testifying, knowing it could cost you professionally. Why?" Rachel looked directly at the jury. "Because if I'd spoken up back then, maybe Emma wouldn't have had to go through this. I'm not making that mistake again." Fuller tried to discredit her on cross-examination, suggesting she had a grudge against David, that she was lying for attention. But Rachel held firm. "I'm here because it's the truth," she said, "and someone needs to stop him." Torres also presented the text messages between David and Emma. On a screen, the jury saw message after message. "Thinking of you. You looked beautiful today. Just wanted to check in. You're so special to me." Individually, they seemed innocent, but together, with context, they showed a pattern of grooming, of excessive attention, of boundary violations. Torres brought in an expert witness, Dr. Linda Ramirez, a psychologist who specialized in trauma and sexual assault. Dr. Ramirez explained the freeze response, why victims don't scream, why they shower, why they delay reporting. The human brain, when faced with extreme threat, especially from someone trusted, can shut down," Dr. Ramirez explained. "It's called tonic immobility. The person wants to move, wants to scream, but their body won't respond. It's not a choice. It's biology." She also explained grooming, how predators build trust over years, how they condition victims to comply, how they isolate and manipulate. "In cases like this," Dr. Ramirez said, "the perpetrator isn't a stranger. There's someone the victim loves, and that makes the trauma exponentially worse, because it shatters their entire sense of safety and trust." Then it was the defense's turn. Fuller called David to the stand. David walked up calmly, placed his hand on the Bible, and sat down. Fuller asked him to describe his relationship with Emma. "I love her like my own daughter," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been there for her since she was a little girl. I helped raise her. I'd never, ever hurt her." "Did you assault Emma on the night of her 23rd birthday?" Fuller asked. "Absolutely not," David said firmly. "I don't know why she's saying these things. Maybe she misunderstood something. Maybe she's confused. But I did not assault her." Fuller asked him about the text messages. "I was checking in on her," David said. "Being a good uncle, there was nothing inappropriate about it." Then it was Torres's turn to cross-examine, and she came out swinging. "Mr. Mitchell, you say you love Emma like a daughter, correct?" "Yes." "And yet you texted her late at night, sometimes at 11 p.m. midnight, just to check in?" David shifted. "I was making sure she was okay." "What father figure texts his niece at midnight to tell her she looked beautiful?" David hesitated. "I was just being nice." Torres pulled up the messages on the screen. "You told her she was special. You told her she was beautiful. You asked her to meet you alone. Does that sound like fatherly behavior to you?" David's composure cracked slightly. "I was just being supportive." "Or were you grooming her?" Torres shot back. "Objection." Fuller stood. "Speculation." "Withdrawn," Torres said smoothly. She stepped closer to David. "You claim Emma misunderstood, but Rachel, your co-worker, also said you made her uncomfortable. Was she confused too?" David's jaw tightened. "I don't know what Rachel's talking about." "So both of these women are lying?" "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying, Mr. Mitchell?" Torres leaned in. "That two separate women who don't know each other, both independently came forward with similar stories about your inappropriate behavior, and they're both wrong." David looked at the jury, his mask slipping. "I'm saying I didn't do anything wrong." But the doubt was there now, in his eyes, in his voice, and the jury saw it. After 2 weeks of testimony, it was time for closing arguments. Gregory Fuller went first. He stood before the jury, his expression earnest, his voice measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about reasonable doubt, and there is plenty of it here. Yes, Emma says something happened, but there's no physical evidence, no witnesses, no rape kit, just her word against my client's, and my client is a man who has spent his entire life serving this community, helping his family, being a good person. Does that sound like a rapist to you?" Fuller paced slowly. "Emma is a young woman who's been through a lot. She grew up without a father. She's struggled emotionally. She's confused. And in that confusion, she's made a terrible mistake. She's accused an innocent man of a crime he didn't commit. And now, David Mitchell's life is in your hands. Don't let a misunderstanding destroy a good man's life. Find him not guilty." Fuller sat down. The courtroom was silent. Then Michelle Torres stood. She walked to the center of the room, looked each juror in the eye, and began. "Reasonable doubt, that's what the defense wants you to focus on. But let me ask you something. What's more reasonable? That Emma, a young woman with no history of lying, no motive for revenge, risked everything, her reputation, her privacy, her relationships, to falsely accuse her beloved uncle, or that David Mitchell, a man who had access, opportunity, and a pattern of inappropriate behavior with young women, crossed a line he'd been building toward for years?" Torres let that sink in. The defense says there's no physical evidence. But you know why? Because Emma showered. Not because she was covering up a lie, but because she was trying to survive. Because her brain was in shock, and all she could think was, I need to feel clean. That's not suspicious. That's trauma. Torres walked closer to the jury. The defense says Emma didn't scream, but Dr. Ramirez explained why. Tonic immobility, the freeze response. It's science. It's documented in thousands of cases. Emma's body shut down because it was trying to protect her from a reality her mind couldn't process, that the man she loved like a father was hurting her. Torres's voice rose with passion. And the defense wants you to believe that Rachel, a woman who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, came forward and lied under oath just to... What? Get revenge on a man she barely knows? No. Rachel came forward because she saw a pattern, and she wanted to stop it. Torres pointed at David. That man is a predator. He groomed Emma for years. He built her trust, created dependency, positioned himself as her protector. And then, when he finally felt safe enough, when he thought no one would believe her over him, he assaulted her, and he walked out that door thinking he'd gotten away with it. But Emma is braver than he ever imagined. She spoke up. She fought back. And now, it's your job to make sure he doesn't get away with it. Torres's voice dropped, became softer, but no less powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about reasonable doubt. It's about belief. Do you believe Emma? Do you believe Rachel? Do you believe that a man can hide behind a mask of respectability while committing unspeakable acts? Or do you believe that a young woman who had everything to lose and nothing to gain would put herself through this hell just to lie? The answer is clear. Find David Mitchell guilty, hold him accountable, and send a message to every survivor out there that speaking up matters, that justice is real, that they will be believed. Torres returned to her seat. The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Bennett turned to the jury. You'll now deliberate. Court is adjourned. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 agonizing days where Emma barely ate, barely slept, barely breathed. Patricia stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, praying, hoping. On the 3rd day, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. Emma, Patricia, and Michelle Torres rushed to the courthouse. The gallery filled again, the same divided crowd, the same tension. David sat at the defense table, his face unreadable. Judge Bennett entered. All rise. Everyone stood. The judge sat, and so did the room. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Bennett asked. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stood. We have, Your Honor. What say you? The foreman looked at the paper in his hands. Then he looked up at the courtroom. In the case of the state versus David Mitchell, on the charge of sexual assault, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. Guilty. Emma gasped, tears streaming down her face. Patricia pulled her into her arms, sobbing. On the other side of the room, David's supporters sat in stunned silence. David himself dropped his head into his hands. Judge Bennett banged her gavel as the room erupted in whispers. Order! Order in this court! Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Emma returned to that courtroom one final time to give a victim impact statement. She stood at the podium, looked at David, and spoke. You were supposed to protect me, Emma said, her voice shaking but strong. You were supposed to be my family. Instead, you used my trust, my love, my vulnerability against me. You broke me in ways I'm still trying to heal from. But I want you to know something. You don't get to define me. You don't get to control my story anymore. I survived you, and I will keep surviving long after you're gone. She turned to the judge. I'm asking for the maximum sentence, not just for me, but for every girl he might hurt if he's ever free again. He doesn't deserve mercy. He deserves justice. Judge Bennett nodded. Mr. Mitchell, please stand. David stood, his face pale. "You have been found guilty of sexual assault," Judge Bennett said. "This court finds your actions reprehensible. You exploited trust, betrayed your family, and caused immeasurable harm to a young woman who loved you. I hereby sentence you to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 10 years. Upon release, you will be registered as a sex offender for life." The gavel came down. It was over. David was led away in handcuffs, and for the first time since that night, Emma felt like she could breathe. Justice was served. But Emma's journey wasn't over. In the months and years that followed, she continued therapy, slowly rebuilding her sense of self, her trust in the world. Patricia never left her side. The two of them grew even closer, their bond strengthened by the fight they'd endured together. Some family members apologized to Emma, admitted they were wrong not to believe her from the start. Others never spoke to her again, and Emma learned something important: that blood doesn't always mean family, and family doesn't always mean safety. Emma eventually opened her cafe, Claire's Corner, 3 years after the trial. It became a gathering place, a symbol of resilience. On the wall she hung a quote: "She was brave when she needed to be, and that made all the difference." Rachel stayed in touch with Emma, and the two became friends, bonded by their shared experience of speaking truth to power. Emma also started speaking at high schools and community centers, sharing her story, teaching young people about grooming, about boundaries, about the importance of speaking up. "If something feels wrong," she'd tell them, "it probably is. Trust your instincts. Tell someone. Don't stay silent just to keep the peace." Emma's story isn't just about tragedy. It's about courage. It's about a young woman who refused to let a predator win. It's about a mother who chose her daughter over her brother. It's about a justice system that for once worked the way it should. And it's about the power of one voice to change everything. After the verdict, Riverside was never the same. The town that had been so divided throughout the trial now had to face an uncomfortable truth. One of their own, a man they'd respected for decades, was a convicted predator, and some of them had defended him, doubted Emma, made her life hell while she fought for justice. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with David's mugshot and the headline, "Local Man Sentenced to 15 Years for Sexual Assault." The article detailed the trial, the evidence, the verdict, and it forced people to reckon with their choices. Some of David's most vocal supporters went silent, ashamed of how wrong they'd been. A few even reached out to Emma with apologies. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you," one woman wrote in a letter. "I was wrong, and you deserved better from this community." Emma appreciated the apologies, but they didn't erase the pain of being doubted, of being called a liar, of being treated like the villain when she was the victim. The damage was done. Trust, once broken, doesn't just heal because someone says sorry, but something else happened too. Other survivors started coming forward. Women in Riverside and in neighboring towns who'd experienced similar things but had stayed silent for years. They saw Emma's courage, saw that speaking up could lead to justice, and they found their own voices. One woman, now in her 40s, reported that her stepfather had abused her as a teenager. Another woman came forward about a coach who'd groomed her when she was in high school. The floodgates opened. Emma's case became a catalyst for change. The local police department started training officers specifically on trauma-informed interviewing techniques for sexual assault cases. Schools began implementing programs to teach students about boundaries, consent, and recognizing grooming behavior. And Patricia, Emma's mother, became an advocate. She started speaking at town halls, at churches, at community centers. "We need to stop protecting predators and start protecting our children," she'd say. "We need to believe survivors, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's someone we love." Her voice, raw with pain, but also with power, moved people, changed minds. Slowly, the culture in Riverside began to shift. David's friends, the ones who'd rallied around him, paid his legal fees, insisted he was innocent. They had to face the fact that they'd been wrong. Some of them withdrew completely, too ashamed to show their faces. Others tried to justify it. "We didn't know," they'd say. "He seemed like such a good guy." But the truth is, they didn't want to know. They chose comfort over truth, reputation over justice, and that choice had consequences. One of David's closest friends, a man named Tom who defended him loudly throughout the trial, stood up at a town meeting 6 months after the verdict. "I was wrong," he said, his voice shaking. "I defended a predator because I didn't want to believe someone I knew could do something so evil. And in doing that, I hurt Emma even more. I'm sorry, and I'm committed to doing better, to listening to survivors, to not making that mistake again." It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a start. Emma herself became somewhat of a reluctant public figure. News outlets wanted to interview her. Advocacy groups wanted her to speak at events. Survivors reached out to her on social media, thanking her for her courage, asking for advice. At first, it was overwhelming. Emma just wanted to heal, to move on, to rebuild her life in peace. But as time went on, she realized that her story had power, that by speaking up, she'd not only gotten justice for herself, she'd paved the way for others. So she started saying yes, to interviews, to speaking engagements, to opportunities to share her message. "I'm not special," she'd tell audiences. "I'm just someone who decided that silence was worse than the fear of not being believed. And if my story can help even one person find the courage to speak up, then it was worth it." Her strength inspired thousands. Letters poured in from survivors all over the country, all over the world, thanking her for giving them hope. Meanwhile, David Mitchell began serving his 15-year sentence at a state correctional facility 3 hours from Riverside. Prison is not kind to sex offenders. Inmates have a hierarchy, and those convicted of crimes against children or family members are at the very bottom. David learned that quickly. Within his first month, he was attacked by another inmate who'd read about his case in the newspaper. David ended up in the infirmary with a broken nose and bruised ribs. The guards moved him to protective custody, where he spent 23 hours a day in a small cell, isolated from the general population. It was for his own safety, they said. But it was also a prison within a prison. Solitary confinement, with nothing but time to think about what he'd done, about the life he'd destroyed, both Emma's and his own. David never admitted guilt. Even in prison, even after the conviction, he maintained his innocence. He filed appeals, claimed he didn't get a fair trial, insisted the evidence was misinterpreted. Every appeal was denied. The evidence was too strong. The jury had made the right decision, but David couldn't accept it. To admit guilt would mean facing the truth about himself, about what he'd become. And that was a truth too painful to acknowledge. In therapy sessions mandated by the prison, David would sit silently, arms crossed, refusing to engage. The therapist would ask him to talk about his actions, about the harm he'd caused. David would shake his head. "I didn't do anything wrong," he'd repeat like a mantra. "I'm innocent." The therapist would sigh. "Until you accept responsibility, you can't heal. And more importantly, you remain a danger." But David didn't want to heal. He wanted to be right. And that stubbornness, that refusal to take accountability, meant he'd serve every single day of his sentence. No early release for good behavior, no rehabilitation credit, just time, 15 years of it. Some people might feel sorry for David, locked away in a cell, isolated, alone. But Emma didn't. When people would ask her if she ever felt bad about what happened to him, she'd shake her head. "He made his choices," she'd say. "I didn't put him in that cell. He put himself there the moment he decided his desires mattered more than my safety. I don't feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for every person he ever hurt. And I'm grateful he can't hurt anyone else for a very long time." That perspective, that clarity, came from years of therapy, years of processing, years of learning that compassion for yourself doesn't mean you have to extend compassion to the person who harmed you.